much, Ina. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Like she shared, I'm Taylor Carter from mySidewalk, and I serve as the customer education and support specialist here. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. I probably should have said that in the chat instead of the weather. Um, but you're all leaders and advocates and data practitioners working every day to make equity not just ideal, but a measurable reality. Like Ina shared, my background is primarily in public health. I started my MPH with an emphasis in epidemiology in the fall of 2019, and we all know what went down in 2020. So this is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, and it's something that I personally have experienced. So I'm really excited today. I know this group brings together people who care deeply about how data can tell the truth about opportunity and ultimately help close gaps in health and well-being. So it really, truly is an honor to get to share this time with you today. Thanks for having me. A quick note about mySidewalk. Data technology has always been a fast-paced industry, and at mySidewalk, we take opportunities to innovate for our customers very seriously. So if you haven't noticed already, mySidewalk has taken another leap on our mission to help change makers just like you understand and make impactful changes with data, and more specifically with data storytelling. Not only do we democratize data access to information, especially in a time where access to information is so crucial, right? But we've created tools that make it easy to put that data into action because every day in communities all across the country, decisions are made that affect and define generations of people. I love that I get to work for an organization on a mission to empower change makers like all of you to use data for your good work. So, some quick level setting. We've had moments over these past several years where we've had more data than ever before, right? But also with that comes more confusion, polarization, and skepticism about that data than ever before. Maybe you've seen it in your own work. You've spent some time building a really powerful dashboard or a report, and it just doesn't land, maybe because people are overwhelmed, or maybe because they don't trust those data or trust where it came from. That gap between data and understanding can slow down real progress. And that's why today's conversation is about data resiliency storytelling, an approach designed to help our data withstand those challenges. Data resiliency storytelling is about pairing dependable, transparent data with clear, human-centered communication so that your message not only informs, but inspires trust and action. And here's why that's so powerful. When data becomes a story, when it connects to values, to emotions, to people's real lives, it stops just being information, right? It becomes evidence that people can feel. That's what builds trust. That's what moves hearts and what moves policies. So today isn't just about communication tips. It's about rethinking how we use data to connect, to unify, and to help communities see themselves in the numbers. So to get there, we're going to walk through 3 short but powerful parts of the mySidewalk Data Resiliency Toolkit. We're going to start with how to craft clear, effective messages. Then we'll explore how to navigate conversations around equity in polarized environments. And then finally, we're going to dive into, I heard there's some extra interest in how to counter misinformation while still being trusted. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to close with a few practical takeaways that you can start using right away in your own storytelling work. Just a quick note, everything that I cover today does come from the mySidewalk Data Resiliency Toolkit. I'm giving a very high-level overview of the toolkit, but if you would like to dive deeper into the videos and the white papers, you can use the QR code on the screen, and I've got my colleague Lindsay on the call. She's going to drop some links in the chat for you as well. Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, so let's dive in and get started with the first part of the Data Resiliency Toolkit, crafting effective messages. This section is really about clarity, right? How we take something complex, technical, or emotionally charged, and we translate it into language that people can understand, that they can remember, and that they can act on. Because even the most accurate data won't create change if people can't see themselves in it, or if they stop listening halfway through. That doesn't really help either, right? This part of the toolkit focuses on 3 simple but powerful shifts: speaking plainly, leading with shared values, and simplifying data so it connects on a human level. Each of these techniques helps us do the same thing: bridge the gap between information and understanding. So, the first principle of effective data storytelling, like I said, is to speak plainly. When we use everyday language, we make our message more accessible, and that makes it more memorable. Most people tune out when they hear jargon or technical terms that either they've never heard before or they don't understand, even if those terms are accurate or what we call it in the industry. Our goal is not to oversimplify, it's to make sure that the message lands. Research shows that messages written at about a sixth to eighth grade reading level reach the broadest audience, including experts. The truth is, plain language isn't about dumbing it down, it's about opening it up. So, for example, we like to throw the term social determinants of health around a lot. Instead, you could say, where we live, learn, work, and play shapes our health. Both are true, but only one invites the listener in. So when you're crafting your next message, ask yourself, would someone outside of my field understand this in one read? If my target audience is the public, I often personally will think about my mother-in-law. If she saw this, what questions would she have? Would this be confusing to her in any way? Or would my grandma be able to understand this? Would my cousin get it? If not, it's a sign to simplify because clarity is what builds credibility. The next principle in crafting effective messages is to start with shared values, because before people decide what they think about your data, they decide how they feel about you and whether they believe you're on the same side as them. When we lead with shared values, things like safety, fairness, opportunity, dignity, we build trust before we even ever share a statistic. These are the values that unite us, even when our opinions or our experiences are different. So, for example, if you're talking about access to healthcare, right, you might begin with a universal truth. Everyone deserves the chance to live a healthy life. Notice that I didn't say everyone deserves access to healthcare, which is true. I said everyone deserves the chance to live a healthy life. That single sentence primes the audience to see your data not as a policy debate, but as a shared human goal. This matters because values shape interpretation. When we frame our data through a shared lens, fairness, opportunity, community, we help people connect emotionally before they start analyzing intellectually. And that connection is what keeps them listening long enough to understand what the data is really saying. So the next time you write or present data, ask yourself, what belief do I share with this audience that can open the door to understanding? Start there, frame it up for them, and then bring it home with your data. And then the third principle of crafting effective messages is to simplify and humanize your data. If your audience can't see themselves or the people that they care about in the story that your data is telling, it's not going to move them to action. The goal isn't to include all of the data, right? It's to choose the right data. Even if you've spent hours creating this really beautiful graph that you love, if it's not the right data, the points that make the story clear and relatable won't be there. So it's really important that we choose the right data. So, for example, instead of saying 20.9% of children experience food insecurity, maybe we make that a little simpler, right? 1 in 5 children. You can see that a lot better in your head. When we translate percentages into people, we make that data stick. We let people see themselves in it. It becomes something that you can picture a student in every row of a classroom. Humanizing data also means pairing it with emotion and context. Tell us what it feels like, not just what it is. Maybe your chart shows long bus commutes for a certain neighborhood. The human version might be families are spending more than an hour each day getting to work or school. It's small shifts like that that turn data into something your audience can remember, repeat, and care about. So, when we simplify and we humanize data, we make it easier for people to understand and we make it harder for them to ignore. The key question here to ask yourself is, what does this number mean for a real person's day-to-day life? And that's where your story can begin. Okay, so now we've laid the foundation for how to communicate clearly. Let's talk about when it gets a little more complicated, right? Because even when our data is solid and accurate and our message is clear, conversations about equity still bring tension or even resistance. This next part of the data resiliency toolkit is about navigating polarization with purpose and empathy. It's about understanding how language, framing, and tone can either open a door or close one, and how we can stay true to our mission without losing our audience. Equity isn't just a data topic, it's deeply personal, and that's exactly how or why how we frame it matters so much. So in this section, we're going to explore how to reframe equity conversations in a way that builds connection, reduces defensiveness, and keeps the focus on shared goals. So let's dive into what that looks like. Okay, let's be honest. The word equity can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially these days. For some, it represents fairness and opportunity. For others, it's become very politicized or misunderstood. And that can make it hard to even start a conversation, especially when we know that the data tells an important story about inequity. The truth is, our goal isn't to water down the message, it's to open more minds to it. The mySidewalk white paper on equity messaging amid polarization gives us a few practical strategies for doing exactly that, staying true to our mission while keeping the door open for dialogue. Here are 3 ways to reframe equity conversations without retreating from what matters the most. So first, leading with shared values, not labels. We want to start with something we can all agree on, like I talked about in the last section, opportunity, safety, fairness, before you even introduce the term equity. For example, instead of saying we're working to advance health equity, you could say everyone deserves the opportunity to live a healthy life. You are saying the same thing, but now your audience is with you and not bracing against you. Second, focus on place, not blame. Use local, place-based framing. Talk about neighborhoods, talk about zip codes and access instead of groups of people. This helps your audience understand inequity as a structural challenge rather than a personal one. It moves the conversation away from who's at fault and towards what we can fix. And then third, show progress and possibility. Don't just highlight disparities, highlight solutions that are already working. The goal is to balance honesty with hope. When people see that change is possible, they're more willing to join you in it. So, reframing isn't about changing the truth at all. It's about changing the frame so the truth can be heard. The next piece is about practicing hopeful framing. So when we're talking about inequities, it can be really easy to focus only on what's broken. And of course, naming the problem does matter. But if that's all people hear, they can start to feel hopeless or tune out. Hopeful framing doesn't mean ignoring hard truths. It means showing that progress is possible. As the white paper says, hope isn't a distraction from truth, it's the fuel for action. So, for example, instead of saying disparities are getting worse, we can say communities are finding new ways to close gaps, and we can learn from what's working. Both statements are true, but one invites people in to imagine solutions. Despair divides, hope unites. So when you share data, highlight local progress and community leadership. Tell the truth, but tell it in a way that keeps that light on. Because the goal, again, isn't to make people feel guilty, it's to help them feel empowered and powerful enough to create change. Okay, so far, we've talked about crafting clear messages and navigating tough conversations in ways that build trust and understanding. In today's information landscape, there's another challenge that we clearly cannot ignore. It's the speed and scale of misinformation. The big question is, what happens when the story we're trying to tell competes with the one that isn't true? As we work to communicate with more clarity and more empathy, we also have to protect the credibility of the data itself. Because resilience in storytelling isn't just about reaching people, it's about keeping their trust once we do. And that's where the third part of the data resiliency toolkit comes in, how to counter misinformation while still strengthening trust. So the first principle of countering misinformation is also the foundation for all of the others. Build trust before facts. Because the truth is, people rarely change their minds because of a statistic that they saw. They change their minds because of a relationship. If your audience doesn't trust you, they're not going to trust the data. That's why it's so important to lead with transparency, to show why you're showing the information and who it helps. For example, instead of launching right into a chart about vaccination rates, you might start with something like, We want to share this data because we've heard your concerns and we want every family in our community to feel safe and informed. Small shift from here's what's true and to here's why I'm telling you this. That changes everything. The second part of this principle is about who is delivering that message. In moments of confusion or doubt, people listen first to the voices that they already trust: neighbors, pastors, teachers, local health workers. So, one of the most powerful ways to counter misinformation isn't to flood people with facts, but to partner with trusted messengers that they already believe in. When we build trust before we share facts, our information doesn't just reach people, it resonates with them. And in a noisy information landscape, that is what makes the truth stand out. Okay, so once we've built trust, then we can start talking about the facts. And how we talk about them matters just as much as what we say. That's the second principle. Use plain human language. When we use technical or emotionally charged words like misinformation or disinformation, people can feel judged or shut down before they even hear what comes next. The white paper reminds us that language carries emotion. So when we label someone's belief as misinformation, it can seem like we are labeling them as misinformed. Instead, we can shift our language to be more approachable. Words like rumors or stories or questions people have keep those conversations open. So, for example, instead of saying, there's a lot of misinformation about vaccines, we could maybe say, there are a lot of questions and stories out there about vaccines. Here's what the data shows us. One feels like a confrontation and the other feels like an invitation. Plain language is powerful because it signals respect. It tells your audience, I'm here to talk with you, not at you. And in an environment full of noise, that respect is also what helps truth travel further. Okay, now once trust is built and your message is clear, the next principle is all about being proactive. Pre-bunk instead of only debunk. So often when we hear misinformation, our first instinct is to correct it. I know that's my first instinct, but the problem is by repeating or by emphasizing the false claim, even if we're doing it just to disprove it, we can accidentally make it even more familiar. That's why the white paper encourages us to pre-bunk, to anticipate misinformation and help people recognize it before they ever encounter it. Here's how that works in practice. Let's say that you know there's a common myth floating around about a local health issue. You might say something like, you might hear people say X, but there's the real story. Da 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 da. A fact. It's easy to see why that rumor spread, but the truth is simpler and backed by data. This approach is often sometimes called a truth sandwich. You start with the truth, you lead with your fact, and then you mention the myth briefly, just enough for context, and then you close by reaffirming the truth. So, picking on vaccines here, we'll start with the truth, which is the top bun of our sandwich, right? Vaccines are one of the most effective tools we have for preventing serious illness and saving lives. Okay. We briefly acknowledge the myth or the filling of our sandwich. You may have heard claims that vaccines aren't safe or that they cause harmful side effects. And then we reaffirm the truth with our bottom bun by saying, in reality, vaccines are rigorously tested, they are continuously monitored, and have protected millions of people in our communities for generations. Think of it as building a fact framework that holds strong even when misinformation shows up later. Pre-bunking works because it prepares people's minds. It builds what psychologists call mental antibodies, tools to recognize and resist false information before it takes hold. So, in a world where misinformation spreads fast, it's not just communication, this is prevention. The fourth principle is about staying connected, even when you disagree. It's simple but powerful. Focus on shared purpose. When misinformation enters a conversation, it's easy for things to get defensive, for people to feel like they're on opposite sides. But when you anchor the discussion in a shared goal, you shift the energy from who's right to what do we both care about? Let's say someone questions a data set about local health outcomes. Instead of correcting them immediately, you could say, I think we both want families in our community to be healthy and safe. Let's look at what this data can tell us and how to get there. That sentence does something subtle but powerful. It reframes the conversation around purpose, not persuasion. So when we focus on shared purpose, we remind people that we're not adversaries, we're collaborators. We're on the same team. We're trying to make sense of the same world. And when trust wavers, shared purpose is what brings people back. It gives them something solid to hold on to, even when they're unsure about the facts. The fifth and final principle here, and maybe one of the most important ones, is to end with hope and action. Facts can inform people, but hope and agency are what actually move them. When people feel overwhelmed by misinformation, they often disengage, not because they don't care, but because they feel powerless. Our job is to show that their actions still matter, that there is a path forward. So, whenever you're closing a communication, end by pointing towards something tangible, a small action, a resource, a next step. For example, you could say, if you're unsure, here's where you can check the data for yourself. Or here's how we can work together to share accurate information. There's small invitations that turn truth into participation. And always pair that call to action with hope. Because when we tell people the truth and show them how they can be a part of the solution, they don't just remember the message, they carry it forward. That's the essence of data resiliency, not just protecting the accuracy of information, but protecting people's belief that change is possible. So when we bring it all together, these three parts of the data resiliency storytelling toolkit, we start to see a full picture emerge. As we wrap up, I just want to leave you with a few reminders about how we can practice hopeful framing in our data stories. So first, don't focus only on what's broken. You got to show what's possible because hope isn't a distraction, it's the fuel for action. For example, instead of saying disparities are getting worse, we might say communities are finding new ways to close gaps and we can learn from what's working. You got to throw some optimism in there. It's a small shift, but it changes everything. Despair divides, hope unites. So highlight local progress, celebrate community leadership, tell the truth, but tell it in the way that keeps the light on, because that's what makes data resilient. It reminds people that change is still possible. Bringing it all together, resilient storytelling really connects three key skills. So first, we have to craft clear messages using plain human language that people can actually understand and remember. Second, we need to navigate polarization by grounding our data in shared values, leading with what unites us before we dive into details. And then finally, we have to counter misinformation through empathy and through trust, meeting people where they are and helping the truth travel further. When these three skills work together, our stories become more than just information. They become connection, and ultimately, they drive action. As we wrap up, I want to thank you truly for the work that you are doing to move this kind of storytelling forward. Across this conversation, we've explored how resilient storytelling helps our data do more than inform. It helps connect. It helps it live on in the decisions, conversations, and communities that follow. When you craft clear messages, you make truth understandable. When you frame with empathy, you make it relatable. When you protect against misinformation, you make it resilient. And when all three come together, you make your data unstoppable. The truth is, trust doesn't happen by accident. It's built one story, one message, one conversation at a time. So as you turn or return to your communities, my challenge to you is this. Find one place in your work where data could become a story, where it could bridge understanding or build hope. And try one of these tools out, because every time we use data to tell a story with empathy, clarity, and trust, we're building a more resilient information ecosystem and a more equitable future. Thank you all so much for your time today. I'd love to hear if you have any questions. I see something in the chat. Oh, it's just Lindsay. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. That was brilliant and extremely helpful and aligns with our mission and our purpose and our culture here at the National Collaborative for Health Equity, and certainly with our Hope Data approach. But I'm certainly welcoming folks to come off mute and give Taylor some feedback, ask any questions, show examples, anybody.
Well, Taylor, I have a question, and it may not be timely at this point because of everything that's going on. But one of the struggles that we've had in talking with constituents has been about the COVID vaccine because there's so much, I don't know if it's even misinformation, but so much um, discussion that conflicts one alleged factual thing from the other. And I don't know if anyone's ever asked you how you would debunk that conversation with what you know to be facts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And very personal for me. I mean, with a background in epidemiology, like I've had a lot of conversations like that in the past. I think it really depends on who your audience is, right? So who is it that's asking those questions? Who is it? Is it a concerned parent? Is it a concerned community member? That is going to impact the shared value that you approach that conversation with. Does that make sense? So, like
So
if it's a,
let me, so I can reframe it a little bit more.
okay,
So this, the African American community in general, in the parts of the country in which I live, not trusting the data, hearing conflicting data, not feeling as if the vaccine has been fully vetted, hearing that the vaccines that were provided by some pharmaceutical companies were not the same thing as what were presented to the government. I don't even know where you would start with that, but those are the conversations. And if you can just, if you have any advice about where to start to frame and I don't even know what the real facts are at this point, to be honest with you.
yeah, I think again, it's all about that shared value, right? So we want to make sure that everyone in our community is as healthy as they can be and is able to um, get whatever they need in order to keep themselves and those around them healthy. That is a way that you can approach that conversation. It's not saying you need to get vaccinated. It's coming from a place of it's important to keep everyone around us healthy and to keep yourself healthy. And then kind of going into that truth sandwich piece that we talked about, right? So kind of starting with that fact and then going into we know that there is conflicting data out there that discredits um, what we know to be true about vaccines. That vaccines have been around for generations, that they are scientifically backed, and that they protect our most vulnerable populations. That's how I've had conversations in the past. It doesn't sound quite like that, of course. But again, starting with that shared value of it's important that we keep everyone around us healthy, and vaccines are the way to do that.
Thank
Good
you.
Taylor,
question.
other questions? Yeah.
Terrence, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I think along with probably many of us on this call have gotten good with telling our stories in terms of what it is that we're presenting to community and what it is that we see as a value. But the challenge for me has always been, okay, connecting that real powerful story to give me the money. How do we connect? How do we close those stories to really become more powerful closers in terms of the ask? Because the money is what the problem is for me. It's just been getting those resources to actually do this work that we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a very real challenge, right? Closing a data story with an ask, especially one that's tied to funding or an investment, is where every seasoned storyteller can lose momentum. So again, tying to emotion, evidence, action, and investment. So people fund what they feel connected to, not just what they understand. So your story should build trust emotionally first and then justify logically with data, and then finally invite action clearly. So think of it like who is affected and why that matters, right? The emotion piece. What is the data showing? What's the scope of opportunity here? The action. What needs to happen next? What are the things that need to take place in order for the data to show better outcomes, right? And then that investment. What specific resource or support you're inviting?
Mhm.
Good question. I know that comes up all the time. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question just around what you were explaining with the kind of truth sandwich. I guess I keep hearing it reiterated in kind of different communications workshops about not repeating the kind of false information. So I guess this is the first time I've heard this kind of truth sandwich model where it does include the false information. So I was wondering if you could talk about kind of why take that route over not mentioning the falsity at all, but like just focusing on kind of the combating like our side of the story.
Yeah, excellent, excellent question. So the truth sandwich, the idea behind it isn't to repeat the false information. It's really to structure the communication so that the truth stays top of mind. So we briefly acknowledge that they have heard of different data or they've heard this misinformation that exists out there, disinformation. We're just acknowledging that that is a narrative that is out there, but then reminding them that the truth is at the top of this, right? That we don't want to focus necessarily um, on that piece. The truth needs to stay top of mind. So when we structure it with, here's what we know, here's what you have heard, but here's what's true, it just kind of reiterates that truth while acknowledging that disinformation that, they've heard. It's a way to make them not feel like disinformed or like they are misinformed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Taylor, I don't have a question. I just want to say that was an outstanding presentation. I thank you so much for it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.